Ever onward, we now want to talk about actually forming molecules. Okay, so we know that they're all going to do the same reactions and form molecules. Well, what are those molecules? So we want to develop some of the ideas of how molecules form and come up with their Lewis structures, kind of what sort of bonds are there. So the underlying principle is still going to be the same octet rule we saw for forming ions. Basically main group elements, so those S and P blocks, they want to have full valences with 8 electrons, right? They want to get 8 electrons to fill their valence. We call that the octet rule because it's that 2 S electrons and the 6 P electrons for a total of 8. All right, well, let's look at a molecule. For example, F2. So we know this is 2 fluorine atoms coming together. So if we want to start, we can draw the Lewis symbols for those fluorines. We know each one has 7 electrons, right? So as an atom, they have 7 valence electrons. They're going to bring those 7 valence electrons each into a molecule and make something out of those 14 total electrons. And if we look at what's going on, we can see that overall there is just 1 unpaired electron on each fluorine atom. And these unpaired electrons are what lead to instability. This is why atoms are going to react, because they want to get rid of these unpaired electrons. They want to pair them up. And so what can end up happening is we can also see they only have 7. They each need 1 more, so they can share that pair of electrons. Once they share it, there are now 8 electrons total for both atoms, because basically neither of them in the process of sharing has lost an electron, but they both have gained 1, giving us 8 total electrons. This is the idea we said that only non-metals form covalent bonds, because you're just gaining electrons functionally towards that full valence. And so generally, this representation, when we start to share electrons, you will see representations that look like this with dots for the shared electrons, but they get really busy, especially if you're going to talk about larger molecules. So usually we just represent that shared pair with a single line. So that one line between the 2 fluorine atoms indicates that there are 2 electrons that are shared between those atoms. So 2 shared electrons are then called a single bond. So we do want to be careful. It's called single bond, but each bond we know is going to be composed of 2 electrons. And so if we take a look at this molecule, one of the things we've seen that all electrons are paired, right? In the fluorine atoms, there were unpaired electrons, and importantly here, everything is paired up. And so all paired electrons are now, a molecule with all paired electrons is generally going to be stable. So lone pairs and bonds are always made of 2 electrons for a reason, and those pairs are more stable. Let's take a look at, we'll use these same ideas. Let's look at a more complicated molecule, O2, okay, another example. If we think we can draw the Lewis symbols, oxygen's in group 6A, so it has 6 valence electrons. We can do the same idea we saw with fluorine. Remember, we're just going to start sharing electrons. So I share it, I may form a single bond. And so now I know that forming that bond has contributed 1 more electron to each atom's valence, but they're still now at 7, right? So this is better. They have more total electrons, but they're still not stable with that 8 valence electrons of an octet. Well, there's another pair of single electrons on each atom, so they can go ahead and share those as well. Okay, and so they can have these 2 pairs of electrons that are shared. And if we want to represent that, we draw 2 lines in between each atom, right? And this is called now a double bond. There are 4 total shared electrons between these, and we can think they're still shared by pair. So we draw 2 lines between the oxygen atoms. You'll note now with the lone pairs, we have these 2 representations of the O2 molecule. Either of them is acceptable. Again, what's most important is that you have the 2 lone pairs on each oxygen atom, not where they are around it. And along those lines, when you're drawing Lewis structures in sapling, it gets a little, you're kind of just automatically adding lone pairs. Sometimes the molecules will look really off. But what's most important is that the lone pairs are on the right number on the right atom, not whether or not they look pretty. We just want to make sure they're on the right atom. We have the right number of them. Okay. So N2, we can follow up, continue with our diatomics. Lewis symbols for nitrogen, they each have 5 valence electrons. And if we take a look, we can see that there's a unpaired, so they can share those electrons, probably share those electrons, and probably share those electrons. And so overall, the nitrogen atoms are going to share 3 pairs of electrons. And so that's 6 total shared electrons, which we call a triple bond. Again, each bond is 2 electrons, so a triple bond is going to be 3 shared pairs of electrons, which is denoted by 3 lines in between the nitrogen atoms that we have right there. All right, so if we're going to put all this together, diatomic molecules, kind of figure out what's going on here. We started with fluorine, right? And our atomic Lewis symbol has 7 valence electrons. And so we know that for a full valence, right, in order to get up there, this fluorine needs 1 more electron. And so if it was going to form an ion, it formed F-, right? And that was why fluorine always forms F- based on the fact that it has 7 valence electrons. Well, if it's going to do covalent bonding instead, it's going to form 1 covalent bond, which is what we saw. Each fluorine atom forms 1 covalent bond, right? They're each on one side of it. And so they each form a single covalent bond with 1 other atom, and that gets them 1 more electron towards their valence, giving them a total of 8 in their octet. A similar pattern follows from oxygen. 6 valence electrons means it wants to gain 2 and become an O2- anion to have a full valence, or it can form 2 covalent bonds. And so we see that each oxygen atom participates in 2 covalent bonds, right? It's 2 with that neighbor oxygen, right? But they each in that process add 2 more electrons into their valence, bringing them up to a total of 8. Nitrogen had 5 valence electrons. It needs 3 to get that 8 full octet. So if it's going to become an ion, it's going to become N3- because that gets it 8. And if it's going to form covalent bonds, it wants to form 3 of them. So it becomes a triple bond in the case of the N2 molecule. Each atom participates in a triple bond. It gets all 3 of those bonds with 1 other atom, but overall it's going to want to have 3 bonds. So if we kind of think about this and look at that idea, all of that reasoning came from the Lewis symbol. And so, if we go back to the idea that a whole column has the same Lewis symbol, that means atoms in a group tend to want to form the same number of bonds. Fluorine tends to form 1. So chlorine, bromine, and iodine right beneath it are also going to probably want to form 1. Oxygen forms 2. Sulfur probably does the same as well. And one of the things that we want to note is that these are rules. We are going to come up with some exceptions. These aren't laws, which are always true, but these are nice guiding principles that we can use. We can also then kind of look at the other side, those alkali metals. We said metals don't form covalent bonds. They only ionize. And one of the things we can see is it's just not practical for them to do it, right? That's a lot of bonds to be forming. Sodium would have to form 8 or have to gain 7 bonds, right? It gains 7 electrons, and that's just too many bonds to form. So they're just going to go ahead and ionize, right? It's just going to ionize instead of forming any sort of bonds. And so that's why metals don't participate in covalent bonding. Okay, so we do want to touch real quick about the idea about these different kinds of bonds, single, double, triple bond. And we want to characterize that with what's called bond order. And so bond order corresponds to usually the number of shared pairs of electrons. So if you have a single bond, that's bond order 1, double bond is bond order 2, and a triple bond is bond order 3. And so what these bond orders do is they numerically distinguish the type of interactions between atoms, right? We said that a particular covalent bond has a certain strength and it has a certain length, right? What are the characteristics of that bond? And so, with these bond orders, they give us away. We do want to note there is going to be fractional bond orders that are going to come up. Those will be the very last day of class, a little more complicated. Need to build up some theory, but for now, our bond orders are 1, 2, 3, which is the same as single, double, and triple bond. Okay, and so the idea of what bond orders do is as that number goes up, the bond gets stronger and shorter. So a bond, it makes sense. If there's more electrons shared, it's a more important interaction. It's going to be a stronger interaction, and those atoms will get closer, right? Because they're sharing more electrons. There's more of an interaction between them. They're going to get closer together to have that stronger interaction. So if I look at, for example, nitrogens that are singly bonded, double bonded, or triple bonded, It's important to note these aren't entire molecules. This is just one connection between atoms within a larger molecule. And so if we were to look at trends in their bond length, if a nitrogen is single bonded to a nitrogen, it's going to be about 147 picometers, drops down to 125 for a double bond, and say 115 or 110, sorry, for a triple bond. So it gets a little bit shorter as you go along, continuing to do that. If we look at our bond energy, we can say how much energy do I have to put in to break it. We can see that goes up quite a bit, right? 193 for the single, 418 for the double, and 941 for the triple. This is an endothermic process to break bonds, so it's always an amount of how much energy we put in. These are always going to be positive. We can see it's going up. It's much harder to break a triple bond than it is a double bond, and then conversely a single bond. And one thing to note again, these are average values. You know, if a nitrogen is double bonded to another nitrogen, it's going to depend on the molecule that it's located in. So not all double bonds are the same, but on average, they are all stronger than single bonds, and they're all weaker than triple bonds. All right, first video down, depending on when you're watching this. Exam 3 is on Thursday, along with the lab practical. Those would be during our on-campus time. This material is not on exam 3, so if you're watching ahead, I'd recommend you focus on studying for exam 3. This will just be due afterwards or later in the day. But we are looking for questions on participation 625 due on the Thursday, sorry, and then 626 due Thursday. We have both of them again, and then Saturday homework. No post lab because we're just doing the lab practical. So just the participations and the homework. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. Otherwise, got plenty more videos to go as we move into kind of the heart of chapter 7, drawing Lewis structures. See you in the next video.